Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, sir, and all of my friends. We are from Group H, and we would like to present a topic entitled English Language in America. So, first, let me introduce myself. My name is Zahratul Arija, and here I am with my other friends. There are Dea Rosi Nurhanishah, Okta Putri Rahayu, Huryatul Husna, and Ibnu Noval. So in this presentation, we would like to explain the topic about the settlement of America, the 13 colonies, and the Middle West. So for the first material, namely the settlement of America, which will be explained by Ibnu Noval. For Ibnu Noval, time is yours.
The settlement of America. English was brought to America by colonists from England who settled along the Atlantic coast in the 17th century. The language spoken in England at that time was the language spoken by Shakespeare, Milton, and Bunyan. In American society, there are three significant periods of European immigration that must be distinguished. The first period is from the settlement of Jamestown in 1607 to the end of colonial times. This can be clearly placed in 1787, when Congress finally approved the federal constitution, or better yet, in 1790, when the last colonies ratified it, and the first census was taken. This year, the population is about 4 million people, 95% of whom live east of the Appalachian Mountain, and 90% are from various parts of the British Isles. The second period includes the expansion of the original 13 colonies west of the Appalachians, first to the south and into the Old Northwest Territories, finally ending in the Pacific. This era ended with the Civil War circa 1860 and was marked by the arrival of new immigrants from two primary sources, Ireland and Germany. The failure of the Irish potato crop in 1845 sparked a massive exodus to America, with 1.5 million migrants arriving in the next decade. At the same time, the failure of the revolution in Germany in 1848 resulted in the migration of an equal number of Germans. Many of the latter settled in certain central cities such as Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and St. Louis. They become farmers in the Middle West. The third period, the period since the Civil War, was marked by an important change in the sources from which our immigrants came. In the previous two periods, and until about 1890, the British Isles and the countries of Northern Europe provided 75 to 90% of all that came to this country. Even in the last quarter of the 19th century, more than 1 million Scandinavians, about 1/5 of the total population of Norway and Sweden, settled here, mainly in the upper Mississippi Valley. But since about 1890, large numbers from Southern Europe and Slavic countries had flocked in. Just before World War I, Italians alone received over 300,000 a year, and our annual immigration was over 1 million. Representatives from Eastern and Southern European countries making up almost 75%. Outside the European immigration, a pattern was the forced immigration of Africans through the slave trade, which began in the 17th century and continued into the mid-19th century. There are currently about 25 million African Americans in the United States, most of whom live in the South and the large cities of the North. Finally, we should consider the influx of Mexican, Puerto Rican, and other Hispanic immigrants during the mid-20th century. The extreme economic imbalances among Western Hemisphere countries have led to a sharp increase in legal and illegal migration to the United States over the past 2 decades. For English language learners, the most exciting period of immigration to America is the first. It was the early colonizers who brought our speech and shaped its shape. Those who came later was largely assimilated within a generation or two. And although the influence may have been felt, it isn't easy to define. To these early settlers, we must devote our immediate attention to understanding the history of English in America.
Next, we would like to presenting about the 13 colonies. It will be presented by Dea Rosi Nurhanishah and Zahratul Arija. To them, time is yours.
The 13 colonies. The settlement from the 13 colonies along the Atlantic seaboard covered a long narrow strip of land extending to Maine to Georgia. This area is familiarly divided into three sections: New England, the Middle Atlantic states, and the South Atlantic states. The earliest New England settlements were made around Massachusetts Bay. Between 1620 and 1640, some 200 vessels come from England to New England, bringing upward of 15,000 immigrants. The majority of the settlers came first in Massachusetts, but in a very few years, groups in search of cheaper land or greater freedom began to push and down the coast and establish new communities. In this way, Connecticut got its start as early as 1634, and the coast of Maine and Rhode Island were early occupied. New Hampshire was settled more slowly because of the greater resistance of the Native Americans. New England was not then misnamed. Practically all of early colonies came from England. East Anglia was a stronghold of English Puritanism, and as we shall see, there is fair evidence that about two-thirds of early settlers around Massachusetts Bay come from eastern counties. The settlement of the Middle Atlantic states was somewhat different. Dutch occupation of New York began in 1614, but the small size of Netherlands did not permit of a large migration. The number of Dutch in New York was never great. At the time of the seizure of the colony by English in 1664, the population number only about 10,000, and a part of it was English. After the Revolution, a considerable movement into colony took place from New England, chiefly from Connecticut. New York City, even then, though small and relatively unimportant, had a rather cosmopolitan population of merchants and traders. New Jersey was almost wholly English. The eastern part was an offshoot of New England, but on the Delaware River there was a colony of Quakers direct from England. At the Burlington opposite side of the town were occupied by a group from Yorkshire and a group from London. Pennsylvania had a mixed population of English Quakers, some Welsh and many Scotch, Irish, and German. Philadelphia was founded the following year, prospered, and grew so rapidly that its founder lived to see it in the largest city in the colonies. From about 1720, the great wave of migration set in from Ulster to Pennsylvania, the number of emigrants being estimated at nearly 50,000. Many of these, finding the desirable land are already occupied by the English, moved on down the mountain valley to the southwest. Their enterprise and pioneering spirit made them an important element among the vigorous frontier settlers who opened up this part of the South and later other territories farther west into which they pushed. But there were still many of them in Pennsylvania, and Franklin was probably close to the truth in his estimate that in about 1750, one-third of the state was English, one-third Scots, and one-third Germans.
Germantown, the first outpost of the Germans in Pennsylvania, was founded in 1683 by an agreement with Penn. In the beginning of the 18th century, Protestants in the districts along the Rhine known as the Palatinate were subject to such persecutions that they began coming in large numbers to America. Most of them settled in Pennsylvania, where, likewise, finding the desirable lands around Philadelphia already occupied by the English, they went up the Lehigh and Susquehanna valleys and formed communities sufficiently homogeneous to long retain their own language. Even today, Pennsylvania Dutch is spoken by scattered groups among their descendants. Lancaster was the largest inland town in any of the colonies. Maryland, the southernmost of the middle colonies, and in some ways actually a southern colony, was originally settled by English Catholics under a charter to Lord Baltimore, but they were later outnumbered by new settlers. The Maryland backcountry was colonized largely by people from Pennsylvania, among whom were many Scotch-Irish and Germans. The necklace of the South Atlantic settlements was the Tidewater District of Virginia. Beginning with the founding of Jamestown in 1607, the colony attracted a miscellaneous group of adventurers from all parts of England. It is said, however, that the eastern countries were largely represented. There were political refugees, royalists, Commonwealth soldiers, deported prisoners, indentured servants, and many Puritans. The population was pretty mixed both as to social class and geographical source. From Virginia, colonists moved south into North Carolina. In South Carolina, the English settlers were joined by a large number of French Huguenots. Georgia, which was settled late, was originally colonized by English debtors who it was hoped might succeed if given a fresh start in a new country. It was the most sparsely populated of any of the 13 colonies. The western part of all these South Atlantic colonies was of very different origin from the district along the coast. Like western Maryland, the interior was largely settled by Scots, Irish, and Germans who moved from western Pennsylvania down the Shenandoah Valley and this into the backcountry of Virginia, the Carolinas, and even Georgia. Okay, to our last topic about the Middle West, it will be presented by Huriatul Husna and Okta Putri Rahayu. To them, time is yours.
Next, the Middle West. The country from the Alleghenies to the Mississippi is divided into a northern and southern half by the Ohio River. South of the Ohio, this territory belonged originally to the colonies along the Atlantic, whose boundary in theory extended west to the Mississippi. North of the Ohio was the old Northwest Territory. The settlement of this whole region illustrates strikingly the spread and intermingling of elements in the population of the original 13 colonies. Kentucky was an offspring of Virginia with many additions from Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Tennessee was an extension of western North Carolina with the same strongly Scotch-Irish coloring that we have seen in this part of the parent colony. Alabama and Mississippi were settled from the districts around them, from Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Tennessee. Nearly half the population, however, was African American. Louisiana, through being so long a French colony, had a population largely French, but even before the Louisiana Purchase, there were numerous Scottish and English settlers from the mountainous parts of the southern colonies. And after 1803, this migration greatly increased. Missouri likewise had many French, especially in St. Louis. But as a territory in which slavery was permitted, it had numerous settlers from its neighbors to the east, Kentucky and Tennessee, and even Virginia and North Carolina. These soon outnumbered and French in this region.
The Old Northwest Territory began to be opened up shortly after the Revolution by settlers coming from three different directions. One path began in New England and Upper New York, earlier colonized from western New England. The movement from this region was greatly stimulated by the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825. A second road brought colonies from Pennsylvania and from other states who came through Pennsylvania. The third crossed the Ohio from Kentucky and West Virginia and accounts for the large number of Southerners who migrated into the territory. In 1850, the Southerners in Indiana outnumbered those from New England and the Middle States 2-1. Michigan and Wisconsin were the only states in this territory with a population predominantly of New England origin. In the latter part of the 19th century, the Old Northwest Territory and the Upper Mississippi Valley received a large number of German and Scandinavian immigrants whose coming has been mentioned above. I think that's all for us. I hope you enjoy and I hope you will more understand about our topic. Thank you for watching and sorry if there are some mistake. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.